Hello, and welcome back to Death and Taxes, the podcast from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I am one half of your host, John Humphreys, and I am joined as usual by Gene Tunny. Gene, how you doing?
I'm very well, John. How are you?
Top of the world. Another beautiful day in paradise. It's actually been. I've been doing well. It's been nice up here. I don't know how you poor Southerners are doing, but Queensland has been living up to the reputation over the last couple of days.
Yeah.
So this is a live stream we put together, the ATA. If you'd like to help us out, taxpayers.org.au. You can see what we're up to. Consider becoming a member or throw us a few pennies if you want. That'll be the end of me shaking the can. We do this. We try to do this every Thursday evening. That's the standard plan. We've missed a few in the last month because I have been moving house. That is now done. I now have proper internet access in a proper office, so we are sorted. So we will be back every Thursday now. So look out for us Thursday evenings, every Thursday evening, live simulcast to Facebook, X, and YouTube. So wherever you're watching us now, could you please give it a like, give it a share, spread it around. And whichever one you're watching us on, please consider going to those other platforms and following us up there, following the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. Follow Gene Tunny and myself, John Humphreys, on those platforms. It helps to, when you share and like and follow it, it helps to spread us around the algorithm and get more people into the conversation, which is always a good thing. We also do take your questions as we go. Questions, comments, criticisms, anything else starting with a K sound. And if they're interesting, or even if they're not interesting sometimes, or especially if they're rude, we can put them up on the screen, interact with you, answer the questions, and see where we go from there. So please feel free to say hi, reach out, and ask questions as we go. So let's dive in. We've got a few things in front of us. I normally at this stage throw to Gene for his roundup of the economic data. I am going to cheat this time though, and steal the first segment to talk about a political issue that's gone on. So you may have seen the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, came out while Albanese was overseas, and he's announced that Labor is backtracking on their previous superannuation tax policy. And this has been referred to as a backtracking, backflipping, running away. So it's a bunch of terms that's been used to describe this. It's very easy to use those terms, and a good way to score political points. I'm going to shy away from doing that because here's the thing. I think the changes that Jim Chalmers have announced have made their tax policy less bad. And I do think in politics and in economics, if someone makes something less bad, that's not the point where you kick them. You kick them when they were making the bad policy. If they backtrack on a bad policy, that's a good thing. We want them to backtrack on bad things, right? We don't want them to backtrack on good things. But if someone said they were going to do a terrible thing and then they backtracked, they should be applauded for backtracking from doing a terrible thing. So I'm going to try and resist the urge to call it an atrocious or large backflip, or he's running away. We want to reward politicians when they stop doing a bad thing. So to that, I say 2 cheers to the Labor Party. 2 cheers, which I'll explain why. Firstly, a bit of context if you haven't been following the superannuation tax discussion. And of course, we all have been with bated breath reading about it every day of our lives because it's fascinating stuff. But in case by chance it has skipped your mind, the Labor Party in the lead up to the last federal election said they were going to introduce a policy to increase the tax on superannuation accumulation. So just a quick background on superannuation tax. Super, the compulsory saving that every worker has, where you've got to put, I think now 12% of your income into a compulsory savings vehicle, normally run by a union or a bank. And they save that, you save that money, they invest it for you. And when you retire, you can get that money back and use it to pay for your retirement. That's the plan. Now, it is taxed when you put the money in. And then when the money is in the super fund, it makes money and that money is taxed. And then when you take the money out, depending how you take it out, it can sometimes also be taxed depending on the situation. So this is about the accumulation phase. When the money is in your super account, it is making money. And the standard situation is that it makes money, it gets taxed at 15%. Right. That's how the system had worked. And Labor said, look, if you're a bit richer than most, if you've got a lot of money in your super account, they're going to change that from 15 to 30%. That's the way they originally pitched it. But then there was this sting in the tail, two stings in the tail, where they inexplicably did, I would say, two unnecessarily stupid things. One is the cutoff for who this applies to was supposed to be people with $3 million super balances, which most of us aren't in that. I don't know about you, Gene, but I do not have $3 million in my super balance. Most people don't. So it was just aimed at the top end, fine. But that wasn't indexed. So over time, a lot of people, if you're having kids now, a lot of your kids would grow up and they would end up, due to the natural growth of the economy and inflation, they would end up with a super balance by the end of their life above 3 million. So it was going to end up catching a lot of people over time. So that was a very cheeky part of the policy. They introduced a policy that only hits the richest couple of percent now, but gets most people in a generation's time. So it's very cheeky. The problem there is it wasn't indexed. The other problem was with your super funds, normally they tax you on the money you've made when you get the money, right? So this extra 15%, so not the first 15, but the 15% top up to get it to 30, that was going to apply to money if you received it as normal, but also even if you only made paper money, right? Paper profits, right? So an asset you held went up in value, but you didn't sell the asset. So you're just sitting there still with the same asset. You don't have any more money in the bank. You'd have no more money in your pocket. But because the asset went up in value, they were going to tax that. So this is called taxing unrealized gains, right? You made a gain, but you didn't realize the gain. Realizing the gain means get the money. So you didn't have liquid money, right? Money you could spend, but you were going to have to pay tax on it anyway. And of course, the big problem there was if you were in a situation where your super fund went up enough, but you didn't sell anything, your super fund didn't sell anything, so it didn't have money to pay the tax, but it would still be liable to pay the tax, right? Because if the cliche situation is you have a self-managed super fund, your self-managed super fund owns the farm that you work on and you work. And then if that farm value goes up, if it went from like 3 million to 4 million, great, you've made $1 million. I'll have 15% of that $1 million, please. So you have to pay $150,000. But if you haven't sold your farm, how do you pay that tax? Right. So that was the issue. The taxing unrealized gains was going to create like a liquidity crunch. So, and both of these things, I said this at the time, I think in my interview with Cam Murray. Yes, I did an interview with Cam Murray at the time, and I pointed out, I think I put this on an X post as well, that both of those things are very strange because you don't need to do them. The government could have just had a 15% tax, indexed the threshold, and also not applied it to unrealized gains. And they would make slightly less money, but they'd still make a similar amount of money, at least in the short run. But they didn't do that. Instead, they did it this really stupid way. And I hinted at the time, could this be a Trumpian strategy where they introduce the policy in the dumbest way possible and then later backtrack the dumb parts and then just have their watered down tax increase? It turns out, maybe, I don't know if this was a strategy all along, but that is now what it looks like Labor has done. So they've come out now and they've said they are going to index that threshold. So good, one tick there. And they aren't going to apply the tax to unrealized gains.
So, John, why would they do that though? So, if it is part of a Trumpian strategy, is it because they wanted to still appeal to some of the more left-wing elements in their party, or to try and win Greens voters, or what do you think their strategy was?
Oh no! If it was intentional, I actually think it's politically quite smart. Because consider this. Let me just finish the ticks I was giving them. One tick to index, one tick to not applying it to unrealized gains. But I'm only giving them 2 ticks or 2 cheers because the third part that's still there is they are still introducing a new tax, right? So yes. I still fundamentally disagree with what they're doing. But consider this now: they are introducing a new tax, but they've done it in such a way everyone has criticized them on 2 points, and they've taken away those 2 points. So what are you going to say now? Why are those balloons there? Anyway, so I thought this could be the strategy, right? If their strategy is to get criticized on those 2 points, fix those 2 points, and then say, done, we fixed your points. What are you worried about? Everyone should support our tax increase now. And as far as I know, at the time, the only person who said there's 3 problems with this tax policy, those 2 I just mentioned, and the other problem is that there is a new tax at all. Like, that was my third complaint, is that we should have concessional tax rates on savings in Australia, and introducing this extra 15% tax rate makes it so that for most people it's not concessional, and it's even now anti-concessional. Worse than what they could get outside the super system. And so I think that still is a problem. You shouldn't have this new tax, but they have now taken away the main talking points for nearly everybody who was criticizing the tax. So some people were saying, like, as I noted at the time, people were saying, well, look, you should index this. You should index it, and you shouldn't tax unrealized gains. Look, if you just did that, it would be okay, but you've done that, so it's terrible. And now they turn around and say, all right, let me fix the 2 things you talked about. Now, Liberal Party, crossbench, do you now all agree that we should have this tax increase? And they've kind of taken away all the talking points from their opponents. So I just think, in that sense, it might be politically smart, because now basically they've taken the wind out of the sails of any movement to oppose this new tax.
Right.
What do you think? Does that make any sense as an interpretation? I don't know if that's actually what happened.
Yeah. I mean, it's been written up as an embarrassment for Jim Chalmers as a backflip. I mean, I think he would have preferred not to have done it. Albanese stepped in and said, look, we've got to change this. And so Chalmers makes this announcement on the day of the hostages, the day the hostages are released, right? How cynical is that, right?
Yes, it does kind of look like it was an unintentional backflip. So I suspect my theory that they were being Trumpian with asking for too much and then just accepting what they always wanted all along. That's probably not actually what happened, but it's maybe I'm giving them too much credit to think that's what happened. Although at the same time, it could be, you say Albo forced him to, that's smart internal politics too. You have good cop, bad cop. Right, you have your hard-edged guy who's really responsible and looking after the numbers, and then you got your lovable oaf of a prime minister who comes in and says, "Nah, mate, let's do it the nice way." And that's actually kind of a dynamic duo at the front of a political party that I think appeals to a lot of people. Think Hawke Keating being the hard-nosed guy, and Hawke being the cuddly guy that sells the hard-nosed stuff and waters it down a little bit, and then everyone goes along with it. Oh, nice old Albo has brought in the good version of the tax increase, and then everyone claps elbows. So. I don't know if Chalmers would appreciate playing the bad cop in the good cop, bad cop routine, but I'm not sure. I don't think this will hurt Albo. I think actually it's backing away from the 2 mistakes was the correct move. Maybe the correct move would be never make the 2 mistakes, but I don't think it'll hurt Albo for him to say, I listened to the people. I took away the things that everyone said were bad. I don't think that'll bite him. And maybe it decreases the chance of Jim Chalmers rolling him as leader of the Labor Party as well. So it's an extra bonus for him politically.
I think so. Yes.
Anyway, do you have any other take on this super tax change?
Well, I think, I largely agree with you there, John. I think we've talked about this before, but I mean, would you agree that the system we've got now, I mean, it is very concessional. There seems to be a lot of agreement among economists and policy commentators that we do need to have some reforms to super, that there are concerns about the level of concessions that are being granted, and there's concerns about the sustainability of that. There's concerns about the equity aspects of that. What's the ATA position? Do you support the current system as it is? Would you accept certain changes to reduce those concessions, particularly in retirement, particularly when we're going to have all of these wealthy baby boomers retiring and not paying tax on their earnings in retirement?
Yeah, there's a few different things to unpack there. These are a big issue. We could spend the whole hour on it. I'll try not to. But firstly, do I support the status quo? No, I don't think there should be compulsory super at all. I think it should be a voluntary superannuation scheme. So that's the first thing. I think compulsory super has a couple of stings in the tail. It sounded like a nice idea to start with. I think it is backfiring for a number of reasons, which would take us a long time to unpack. Where there is if you go to the Australian Taxpayers Alliance YouTube page, I've got a session there where I think I riff on this for 20 minutes. So if anyone wants to look into that, I don't think compulsory super is helping anybody. It's not working to make our fiscal system more sustainable, and it is massively increasing the economic and political power of the unions and the banks, because these super funds now have more assets under control than the entire value of the Australian Stock Exchange. So massively, we now have the workers controlling the means of production via union-run super funds. So the Fabians have won. But anyway, put that aside. I wouldn't have it be compulsory, but I would have it be concessional. So I actually do think that one of the biggest mistakes we are making in our tax system is we do not give a big enough concession to savings. So I'd have a concessional tax system applying to savings. Now, again, I would do it the exact opposite way than the super system is doing it. The super system taxes you when you're putting money in and taxes you when you earn money. And then for most people, when you retire, doesn't tax you as you take it out. I would flip that. And I would make it so that the money you put in comes from your pre-tax income. So putting money into super becomes a tax deductible action. And the money being accumulated in super funds, I would have that not be taxed. And then as you're taking it out, I would tax it. And you could tax it at the marginal rate when you're taking it out if you like there, because the benefit of not having taxed it on the way in is still quite a nice benefit. Although I would still probably concessionally tax it on the way out. But it's so that is some sort of tax concession. And then I understand the concern they have, though, that there's a possibility here for people who are already stinking rich to be able to dine in the most on the tax concession. If you want to address that, I would say then just limit the amount you can put into the concessional tax vehicle, right? Which for me would be everyone would have a savings trust vehicle, and that is the vehicle that is concessionally taxed. Or if we keep super, then your super system. If you're worried that the concession is too big, keep relatively generous concessions, but then just cap the amount that you can put into that fund if you're worried that rich people are getting most of the benefit. But I would want still the non-rich people to get a very significant concession on money when you save it. Because one of the things I think we do wrong in this country is we just don't have enough money going from domestic savers into domestic investment so that there is domestically owned capital in this country. We need more capital in this country desperately. I think that's one of the missing drivers of productivity. We need productivity. For that, we need more capital. And then ideally, you want that capital to be domestically owned so that the people who really benefit from that capital are Australians. And for that, we need more domestic savings. And so,
well, one of the things that I agree, John, and one of the things that shocks me when I get the updates from the Weekly Times, the rural newspaper, all the farmland that's being purchased by, there's Canadian pension funds, for example, they're big purchasers, Chinese people, investors in other countries. I absolutely agree with you there. All right. So that is super done. We've ended with glorious agreement yet again. Let's try and find something we disagree on today so we can throw some mud and people can join in. If you are listening along, remember we do take comments, questions, criticisms as we go. Feel free to throw a tomato if you'd like. But up next, we've got Gene's Roundup. Have we got a name for this yet? Weren't we calling it Gene's Graphs or Grabs?
Gene's Grabs?
Yes.
They both start with G, but I feel like the GR... Anyway, we should talk about that off air. But whatever we are calling it, let's bring it up on stage, Gene, and tell us what you've got for us this week.
Yes. Well, the big news today, and this had an impact on the markets for sure. There was the unemployment rate came in at 4.5%, national unemployment rate up from 4.3%. And now everyone's talking about, the RBA is going to have to cut the cash rate on Melbourne Cup Day. And there's concerns about what this means for the economy, all the standard sort of thing you'd expect. However, this comes a day after Sarah Hunter, the chief economist of the RBA, warned that the next inflation figure that's coming out in 2 weeks' time, that's going to be probably higher than it previously expected. And there are concerns about whether inflation is going to stay, or it's anchored, or it's bounded in that 2 to 3% target range. So it's not guaranteed that there'll be a rate cut on Melbourne Cup Day that's coming up, and so much is going to depend on that next inflation figure. Regarding what has happened with unemployment, why the unemployment rate's going up, essentially employment growth is flatlining or really employment slowing down, and we've got very low employment growth, but population growth is continuing, and largely driven by international migration. And there's all sorts of aspects to this story. We know there's issues about demand for housing versus supply. We're not building enough houses. There's concerns about the strain on our infrastructure, on our cities. There's also many commentators identifying issues of social cohesion. So there, a range of issues associated with this population growth. What we're seeing is, because the economy is a bit sluggish, we're having population growth, more people entering the labour market, and then unemployment rising because we're not having the jobs created at the same time. And there's a chart of the CPI that mentioned that before. The last monthly CPI was around 3%. So potentially, if we have the quarterly reading come up toward 3%, then we won't be having a rate cut on Melbourne Cup Day. But just wait and see what happens then. Okay, so that was the first set of issues I'll be looking at, John, just what's been going on in the national economy, all of the talk, the discussions around what the RBA might do. So I think it's very much anyone's guess at the moment what they'll do on Melbourne Cup Day. Just have to wait and see what that is. Yep.
This CPI data, is this the underlying or is this the headline?
That's the headline, yeah.
The headline. So I think the underlying, the bump up at the end has been because they're winding back their electricity discounts, isn't that
correct? Yes. So that's basically what's happened there. Yes, and the underlying, if I remember correctly, I should have put that chart up. That's showing some pressures too. On the upside. So they are concerned about whether the inflation is remaining within that target band. I probably should have put that underlying. Yeah. So the trend. Yeah.
Because my understanding was that the headline inflation had spiked back up to 3%ish, but the underlying was still tracking fairly stable at about 2.5%, which is kind of like the reverse of the situation a year ago when the government kept introducing these electricity subsidies to artificially push down the headline inflation. And I think, to be consistent there, when the government was doing that, I said at the time, I still think this is true, that the RBA isn't that daft. They can see through that trick. Right, they're watching the underlying inflation. So if the underlying inflation is still tracking around 2.5%, but headline inflation is just spiking because they're removing a subsidy.
Yes.
To be consistent with my old line, it would be, well, the RBA can see that that's not a structural increase in inflation. That is a spike caused by a policy adjustment. So it'd be interesting to check. I might do that the next time you're chatting. I'll just bring up the ABS and just check where that is.
Of course, that is the case. So the annual trimmed mean on the monthly measure is 2.6. So you're right, it's around 2.5. And the reason that monthly CPI went up to 3, is a lot of that's due to those electricity subsidies coming off. That's correct. I'm still in credit though, so I've still got the benefit of it at the moment. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we just got our last credit as well. But look, I suspect there's going to be a lot of pressure to cut those rates come Melbourne Cup Day. Although I got to say, I think the whole discussion is being looked at through the wrong lens. And of course I would say that, but I mean, this whole discussion is still being had very much in a world where the Phillips curve is the defining feature of the analysis, where you've got, you just look at unemployment and inflation, balance those together and try to work out whether they say you could have rate cuts or rate increases. Like I say,
Yes.
I think it's inflation is what you've got to be looking at. If you're aiming for between 2 and 3, then you've got that. I would then say, because you've got that, don't make a change. But I would also say, if it was up to me, I think we should be aiming for less than 2% inflation. So I wouldn't be cutting rates, but it's not up to me. And according to their own rules, according to the way they normally behave, I think they will do a small cut in November. And according to their own rules, I don't blame them for it. Well, the unemployment's ticking up and inflation staying stable in the middle of the bracket. And the way I see the world, if you had stable 2.5% inflation, you wouldn't cut rates. But I think if I put myself in their shoes and pretend I believe what they believe, I think they'll put in a cut. But no, we've got a couple of weeks worth of data between now and then. So another 2 weeks only. All right. So, well, we'll see. We'll put odds on it next week, Gene, and then we can come back the week after and see who's got bragging rights.
Well, yeah, but if you listen to Sarah Hunter, who's their chief economist, and she's advising Michelle Bullock, so she was reported yesterday as saying they're concerned about underlying inflation stronger than previously expected. So, yeah.
Well, I'll take your word for it. I mean, let's lock in a prediction next week when we come back next week, and we can hold each other to it, and then one of us at least gets bragging rights.
Yep, that sounds good.
In November. The other point here where I just push back on the standard analysis of all this is the way people are looking at unemployment. And people are looking at it as, is it an indication of an overheating economy, or unemployment going up? So does this indicate the economy is too weak? The economy has been too weak for the last 10 years, right? I mean, we've been basically in per capita recession for the last 3 years. So and unemployment's been low during a lot of that time. So using unemployment as a metric for the strength of the economy is I think, transparently not the right way of looking at it. Instead, I would suggest quite an obvious take on unemployment. And that is when the COVID disaster, and it wasn't due to COVID, it was due to the government's overreaction to COVID. But when the COVID disaster struck, what we saw is inflation spiking and wages going down, real wages going down, average wages going down, minimum wages going down. Now, just standard economics, if the minimum wage went down, what would you expect to see in the labor market? Right? It's just more people being able to keep their job and being able to get a job if they want a job. So we had real minimum wages and real average wages going down. And then we saw this, what everyone else thought was this inexplicably good labor market, right? The economy's going backwards. We're in a per capita recession. We're in a cost of living crisis. Everyone thinks the economy's in the toilet, but unemployment rate goes below 4%. And everyone's scratching their head. I'm not scratching my head. Real wages went down. Real minimum wages went down like significantly. Right? They were, I think, putting up minimum wages by 2% while we had 8% inflation.
Yeah.
So we should expect unemployment to have been relatively low. And then I was just looking at this bit today. At what point did real wages and average wages get back up to recover to once again be at the highest level, right? To catch up to their previous maximum and start exceeding their previous maximum? When did that happen? Middle of this year. For both average wages and minimum wages. So now we have real wage growth happening in recent years, and that real wage growth is finally caught up to the previous maximum, and the same thing for minimum wages. And as you see, these minimum wage increases now coming in at 1.5% higher than inflation, instead of like 4, 5, 6% lower than inflation. So as you're seeing these real minimum wage increases, if you pick up a textbook and just gave the stereotypical cliche answer, you'd go, oh, well, I guess unemployment's going to start ticking up. And then we look over at the data and the unemployment rate is ticking up. And I'm thinking, like, this is not telling us about interest rates. This is telling us about minimum wages. That's the story I see in this data. So I'm not surprised to see it tick up. And it'll be very interesting to see what the minimum wage decision is next year. But I think that's going to have the bigger influence rather than interest rates.
Yeah, interesting. I think I think that's a they're valid points, John. I mean, I would add that I think a lot of the strong employment growth, particularly out of coming out of COVID, I mean, there was all that stimulus provided to the economy. There was all of the JobKeeper and then the RBA with the ultra low interest rates. I think that certainly contributed to a lot of, a boom-like atmosphere. And as we opened up, all the pent-up demand.
It was a recession.
Sorry?
There was no boom.
No, after COVID. Once we got out of COVID.
There was no boom. I mean, okay, there was just the immediate COVID was like down, back up, recover.
Yeah.
But then, so just average those two together and you've just got it fairly flat. But then for the 2 years after that, you had a per capita recession. A per capita recession with under 4% unemployment.
But we had strong employment growth for sure. And I mean,
but not caused by high aggregate demand because the economy was in the toilet.
I think we'll have to have this conversation again. I agree with you, just to delve more into it. I agree with you that, we certainly had the per capita recession. We had very low productivity growth, but at the same time, there was a lot of activity. I think activity was strong because of, partly due to the reopening, the enthusiasm around that, but also all of the additional money that was in the economy.
What do you mean by the activity, though? Because isn't activity normally called GDP?
Yes. Yeah, well, business activity, but at the same time, we had strong population growth. And so the strong population growth is subtracting from that and giving us the GDP per capita recession you're talking about. But I would say that, I have to look back at the GDP data, but my recollection of that immediate year or two after the reopening was the business conditions were relatively strong. I know there are indicators like consumer confidence really hasn't recovered or has been fairly low, and GDP per capita has been low. So, but it felt like maybe it was idiosyncratic to me, but certainly in professional services there was a really, a boom period, or it felt like it in that immediate post-pandemic period.
I mean, the immediate quarter after the restrictions were lifted, there was a big bounce back. But if you basically just put those two quarters next to each other and just balance them, like offset, then it still is a pretty flat line after that. And it's a downward trending flat line if you look at it per capita. But if you just look at the aggregate GDP numbers, it's still not particularly impressive. And also, that's not really the point, because you experience the world in per capita terms, right? If you're unemployed, that's relevant at the personal level. If you've got your GDP, your income, that's relevant at the personal level. And so the economy was pretty mediocre it's been pretty mediocre for the last decade, to be honest, but I mean, especially for the last couple of years. And if the economy was that mediocre in every other circumstance, we would be thinking, oh, is unemployment going to get below 8 or 10% now? And instead we were sitting there going, oh, look, unemployment, well, we're in a recession and unemployment's just gone to 3.5, which was a very strange situation. I mean, this was an anomaly. I'm surprised it did get some commentary, but it didn't get as much commentary as perhaps it deserved. There was a clear break there.
Yeah.
And now the economy is actually ticking up a little bit now, right? So finally, we're out of a per capita recession. Potentially, we'll see. It's been ticking up, going up and down a little bit, but the economy seems to be doing a little bit better than it has been for the last couple of years. And at that time, unemployment's gone up by 1 percentage point. So there's an anomaly there. I don't think unemployment here is tracking with the health of the economy. I think it's tracking with the comparison of wages with productivity from workers, because no matter how good or bad the economy is going, if someone is bringing in $20 an hour productivity to your business, if you have to pay them 15, you'll employ them. If you have to pay them 25, you won't employ them. And that's going to be true whether you're in the world's biggest recession or the world's biggest boom. So anyway, that's my microeconomic take on this issue that's always seen through a macroeconomic lens, which of course I would say, because that's what I always say. Anyway, that's the Australia's data. I believe, though, you had something else for us.
Well, I did have something else on Australia, but I think it's consistent with something we've previously talked about when we had our discussion at the Friedman conference on the birth gap. I don't know if you remember that, John, a couple of years ago. The latest birth data from the ABS came out yesterday and show that our total fertility rate, so this is the number of babies born per woman, so they work out an estimate of that. That's now, it's stayed below 1.5 and it's declining. So it was just, a real like cigarette paper difference between the figure and 1.5 last in 2023, but now in 2024, we're opening up more of a gap. So it's about, I should have remembered the exact rate. It's 1.48 something or something of that, close to that. Let me just bring it up.
That's right. 1.48. Yeah,
that's it. Yes. So essentially, I mean, so well below replacement rate. Replacement rate's 2.1. So you need one for, what is it? One for mum, one for dad, and then you need one for accident. Peter Costello called it one for the country. So because Costello said one for, what did he say? One for mum, one for dad, one for the country. That came from Winston Churchill when he was the Home Secretary in the early part of the 20th century. And I think he wanted them to have one for mum, one for dad, one for accident, and one for the country, because infant mortality was much higher back then. But essentially you need on average more than two to compensate for mortality, people not living to adulthood. So this is hugely concerning. There was a period from after the introduction of the baby boom. Now, whether that's causation or correlation can be debated, but it was tracking back up toward 2 from the mid 2000s, and there was a lot of excitement about that. Is it because of the $5,000 baby bonus that was introduced by the Howard government? But since that really, after that was withdrawn, or it's been changed, hasn't it? There's the different subsidies that have been put in place. I'm trying to remember exactly what the policy settings are, but essentially we don't have the old baby bonus.
I think it's parental leave now.
That's for yes. And so the fertility rate's been trending back down since over the last decade or so. And look, there could be a whole range of reasons for that. I mean, there's preferences, there's people remaining single longer or never partnering. There's just the cost of living. There's the concerns about the cost of living. I mean, we know what's happening with housing costs. People are going to be delaying having children, and maybe they're having fewer children. So that's what we're seeing, and it's starting to get to, I think, concerning levels, because it's getting to a level where it's well below where it was in the early 2000s, when we started being concerned about the aging of the population, and we started becoming concerned about these demographic issues. And that's when the Howard government introduced the baby bonus. Now we're well below that, and we're I don't know whether we'll continue, but I mean, worst case, you end up somewhere like Italy or Japan with their fertility rates of, I don't know, 1.2, 1.3, or maybe even lower. So and then what do? You basically have to rely upon migration to grow your population. I mean, we are doing that at the moment, largely. We've still got some natural increase because the baby boom cohort was so large that the cohorts after that have been relatively large too, and there's still more births, and because of all the migrants were brought in, as well, there's still more births than deaths, but that will eventually turn around, and we'll be solely relying upon migration. And that raises, I think we're already seeing issues about whether we can cope with the level of migration that we've got at the moment. And that's going to become, we're going to become even more dependent on it for a growing population and to help pay for public services. So yes, huge concern there. And John, I mean, you share my concern with the low fertility rate too, if I recall correctly.
Well, if you remember that great event we did at the Friedman Conference a couple of years ago, I was the Chicken Little, I believe, of that session. And I said then something that I've repeated a few times since, that I think this is the issue of this century. Like if you look back in history, if you know your history, the 5th century, what happened? Rome collapsed. The 11th century, what happened? The Normans conquered England. There's some big thing that happens in a century. People don't remember the details of what happened in all of the years before and after Rome collapsed. Rome collapsed. That is the thing that happened that century. And when people look back on the 21st century, they're not going to remember terrorism. They're not going to remember climate change. They're not going to remember COVID. They're going to remember, oh, that was the century where the human species started dying out for no apparent reason. That's like the first... one of the only times in history where you had massive worldwide population shrinkage because of wealth, like not because of war, not because of poverty. We've seen that before, right? If people get poor enough, their populations decline. If people go to enough wars, their populations decline. We are living through a period of unprecedented prosperity and some of the lowest levels of war in the history of humankind. And we are suddenly seeing not just a tip down of fertility rates. It's not just ducking below 2. It is plummeting. Australia's 1.5 or 1.48 now. You expressed surprise that it kept going down. I was saying this 3 years ago. It's going down everywhere and it's not stopping.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks, oh, it'll stop at 1 point now. Yeah. And it goes to 1.8. Oh, it'll stop at 1.8. It's below 1 in Hong Kong, in Korea, in the eastern coasts of China. I believe now Japan's just tipping below 1. This is a massive issue that's going on, and it's going on worldwide. So this migration issue is not even a real solution. Firstly, I agree with you. It's not a smart solution internally, right? We've got other problems here. You can't just keep mixing massive numbers of people from different places and just assuming that everybody is just an equal cog in a machine that you can just change out as your carburetor breaks. So there's other problems with migration. But putting that aside, migrants from where? East Asia, population collapsing. By the way, I should point this out. The population isn't collapsing yet. It takes about 30 to 40 years from when population goes down for it to start showing up in the population data, which is why this is such an insidious problem, because we can see the train wreck coming from 40 years away, but no one is really experiencing it until it's way too late to change direction. But put that aside. So the fertility has collapsed in East Asia. So we're not getting people from East Asia. It's just fallen below 2 in the subcontinent. A lot of people worried about Indian migration. China's population is already going backwards. India's population is going to start turning the corner soon. So you're going to start running out of, start shrinking the population in the subcontinent. The Middle East and North Africa, it's just getting down to below 2. Europe, well below 2. North America, well below 2. And then the North Americans say, well, we can just get people from South America. South American fertility is lower than North American fertility. They're getting down close to 1. This is a worldwide phenomenon. This is going on pretty much everywhere except sub-Saharan Africa. And even sub-Saharan Africa is seeing their fertility rate go down, but there is from like very high levels to now just high levels. So they're still above 2. This is happening everywhere. It seems unstoppable. Hungary threw, I think, 7% of GDP at the problem, and they got their fertility rate from 1.2 up to 1.3. I mean, this is a massive issue with huge consequences, and no one really even knows what's causing it, and no one can seem to work out any solution. And then everyone says something like a common answer from Aussie here, and not meaning to rip on you, Aussie, because it's a very obvious thing to think of there. But the cost of living implies we don't have enough money to have kids. This is happening most to people with the most money. Richer countries, as you get richer, your fertility rate drops. Inside those countries, the richer people, their fertility rate drops. So, I mean, the fertility rate is still very high in Zambia. And it's not because Zambia has a higher quality of living or a better, lower cost of living than Australia. It's not because Zambia is so much richer than us, they can have that many more kids. I think the second part of what Ozzy wrote there, I think that's a part of it, cost of housing. But not just because, we can't afford housing, but because the cost of housing is getting people to live in smaller houses. When people live in smaller houses, they tend to have smaller families. So I think that is part of the story. But really, everything you can think of to explain this, you can find counterexamples. It is an insidious problem that is really hard to unpack. And I don't think people have the faintest clue what this is going to mean yet, because this is going to be, the aging of the population on steroids. But then when populations start to shrink, I know I'm going on quite a long rant here, but I don't think people have thought this through. When populations start to shrink, you're going to see the natural state of affairs is that asset prices will decline. So what do you invest in? Right? Because I'll take this back a step, right? So the population is fertility rate going down. That means the population ages, people get older, and that happens, pretty quickly. That's the first order effect. Second order effect is after about 30, 40 years, when the bigger generations start dying off and the next generation is smaller and smaller, you start seeing population shrinkage.
Yeah.
And so when the first one happens with the aging population, we just don't have enough young people to pay tax into the system that people need for their pensions and for their healthcare, and especially healthcare, right? Because old people take up most of the healthcare. And so that's a problem that's already big enough and probably insolvable for most welfare states, right? This is just a fundamentally unsustainable situation we're in welfare states. But then you at least have a theoretical solution to that. The theoretical solution is you incentivize people to save to pay for their own life, right? I mean, you incentivize people to save up more, to invest in a long-term health fund in their concessional savings for their retirement, as we discussed a bit earlier. So you've got a theoretical answer, but that theoretical answer comes from incentivize people to save more. And we should do that. But then go to phase 2 of this problem. The population starts shrinking. What do you invest in when you save? Share market is going to go down 5% a year, and that'll be normal, right? That's not, I've had a horrible year. It'll be, my share price only went down 2%. Oh, well done. What did you do? You did really good investing. I mean, that's going to be the new normal when you've got a global shrinking population. To that, I don't think people have even started thinking what the consequences of this are going to be. And then the third order effect, by the way, which is the really fun one, is different sorts of populations have different fertility rates. Yes. And so that, like, the joke at the end of this, by the way, is firstly, woke was always going to lose because woke people just don't have kids. So, they can be annoying for a generation or so, but if we just nod and smile and grimace long enough, the non-woke people have kids, the woke don't, they'll be gone in a generation. So that's the good news. But the real news is the world is going to end up being ruled by the Amish and the Orthodox. Well, because the Amish and Orthodox Jews are the only two people who seem to have kicked the trend. That's it.
Is that right? Oh, okay. We'll have to look up those stats. Yeah, incredible.
But yes, religious people tend to have more kids. People with conservative outlooks tend to have more kids. People who invest more on intra-group social capital rather than intergroup social capital, i.e. you form a close bond with your community and invest in your community, as opposed to going and helping save the spotted whale in South Bolivia or whatever. Those sort of people have high fertility. So we're going to see a fundamental change in the nature of humankind as one cohort, basically the radical left, all just die off.
Incredible. I mean, one thing I'm wondering now, John, were the Amish right all along? So they've got that a very deliberative approach to new technology, whereas we embrace it. We just adopt it without thinking about whether it's going to be net beneficial to us. And this is partly a jest, but the Cal Newport writes about that in one of his books. They have a very deliberative approach to technology. They think about, will this benefit us? Do we need to take advantage of this? So yes, interesting. I'll have to look at their fertility data. I find that fascinating.
I think it has more to do with the social bonds. I mean, this is one of my the theories I have that seems to show up fairly consistently. It's how well connected you are to the triumvirate that I spoke about at CPAC last year. to how closely are you linked to your family, church, and community. And if you're not a Christian, some equivalent of church, I don't know, so Lions Club or mosque or synagogue or whatever it is for you. But the closer ties you have to family, church, and community, the higher your fertility rate tends to be. And I think the Amish have very closely linked to their family, church, and community.
Yeah.
By the way, another comment here from Aussie I think is worth picking up. I think this is absolutely right, by the way. And I think this is the sort of comment that we have been told for the last couple of decades that you're not really allowed to say. But I actually think I think people rebel against the idea of immigrants because that's the only thing you're allowed to say. But I think it'd be the conversation that would be much better to have if we can is how do we pick the immigrants that actually are most likely to add value, to bring the net benefits without bringing the net costs. And maybe that means we just have to learn to be pickier and to be a bit more honest about what we want to pick.
Yeah, but the government pretends that's what it's doing, right? So,
but only on economic issues, right? So,
right. Okay. Oh, right. Oh, gee. Yeah. I mean, that's
So we're not allowed to say that, right? But
well, I don't know if you're not allowed to say it, but we certainly don't want to let people in who don't share our values and will cause trouble in the community. But how do you screen? I mean, that's difficult to screen for, isn't it? And we have to have a non-discriminatory immigration policy with respect to country of, well, not necessarily country of origin, because they could be coming from an area or a rogue regime.
Why do we need to have non-discriminatory? Firstly, we don't currently. We currently have a discriminatory immigration policy where if you are a Kiwi, you can come at any time for any reason, no questions asked, just get on the plane. And we don't have that policy. And I'm not suggesting we get rid of that. Yeah. I'm saying like Kiwis are probably the exact sort of people who can very easily integrate into Australia. So I'm not trying to rip on the Kiwi immigration system that we've got here. Yeah. But we already discriminate. Thankfully, we discriminate for exactly the sort of country that would fit in quite well. Look, it's a third rail of Australian politics to mention that. And I think because people are scared of where that conversation can trend, they find the much safer thing to say is just cut immigration. And look, sure, we've got probably had too many migrants for what's good for the country lately. But I think the fuller conversation is not just the raw numbers. It's which sort of migrants add value to the country. And I don't just mean economic value, just add value. But which migrants would improve the quality of family, churches, and community? To go back to the previous question of the sort of things that actually drive fertility rate, probably drive fertility rate because they drive people actually being happy in their own lives. I don't have an easy answer for that, by the way, but I think at some stage that might be a conversation we have to be allowed to have. Or else all we can have is this sort of binary question of do you want to turn immigration on or off, which I think is not a very nuanced way to look at immigration.
Well, I think we've got to have the debate about the policy settings we have in place, which are allowing far too many student visas without, the necessary accommodation, and then the easy path from student visa to permanent residency. So there's there's a very high percentage of those who come in on a student visa who 10 years later get permanent residency. It's something like 40% or something like that, right? So I think we've got to be looking at those policy settings because that's what's causing there's certainly the social cohesion issues. It looks like we've let some people into the country who don't share our values, who want to, carry on conflicts from other parts of the world. So that's clearly an issue. But the bigger issue, or not to say that's not a significant issue, but where people are really feeling it is just the sheer numbers of people that are pushing up rents, that are pushing up house prices, that are causing congestion. And a lot of that is to do with the policy settings regarding the student visas and just how easy then it is to get the permanent residency.
No, I agree with that, but there's the sting in the tail of that question, which, sorry, I'm fine with where this goes, but other people won't be. That's because our university system doesn't work without massive numbers of foreign students, right? Our universities are massively cross-subsidized. If we want to continue having our current students receiving a massive cross-subsidy, and students already don't like the fact that they have HECS, right? But that HEX is like a delayed loan, which is a pretty
Yep.
convenient way to get a loan. So lucky them to start with. And secondly, the value of your HEX is already half of the retail value of your degree. For most people, it's massively cross-subsidized, right? You're not paying the full cost. Your HEX isn't the full cost of your degree. It's like half the cost of your degree. And how is it you get half? That's mostly not cross-subsidized by the Australian government. It's mostly cross-subsidized by foreign students. Right. So, I mean, go back to before when we talked about the aging of the population, pushing pensions up higher, pushing health up higher. That's been happening for a couple of decades. Like Costello was talking about that more than 20 years ago, introduced the intergenerational report. Good thing that he did. And pension, aged spending, health spending have all been growing faster than GDP. And that's why we keep having budget deficits now. The only offsetting thing they've had is that it's been bipartisan agreement to wind back on government funding of higher education, basically. That's one of the only areas they've wound back government spending. That's one of the only places they could find it politically acceptable to balance the books, because, health, aged, and pensions, those costs are just running unsustainably out of control. So they've wound back that university spending, but they still have all of this cohort of university students who still get to vote. Maybe they shouldn't, but they do. And so you need to cross-subsidize them somehow. Foreign students, massive foreign student cross-subsidy. And why do foreign students come to Australia? Not because we've got that great education system, but because they know it's a backdoor visa system, right? They know it's a way to get an Australian passport. So the problem there is if they say, oh, you can still come here, but you have to leave after 3 years, a lot fewer people will want to show up. If we just say, look, we're not allowing student visas, then, they're just not allowed to show up. Either way, that would mean we either have to have the government increase spending on universities by an order of magnitude. So where do we get that money from? We already can't afford our system. Or we just have to let half the universities go bust. And I said at the beginning, I'm fine with where this goes. I actually think we should let half our universities go bust. I think our universities are currently a net drain and taking our country backwards. I think far too many people go to university. Far too many people study stupid things at university. Far too much stuff that happens at university is bullshit that would be actively better off if it didn't happen. Not just it doesn't give value, it creates anti-value. So I think that's not a bad outcome, is if we just massively scale back the university sector in this country, says the former university lecturer. But I don't suspect that is going to get 50% plus one votes in a federal election. So this is the catch-22 that Liberal and Labor have, right? They've looked at this. They know that people would love it for them to say we're winding back student visas, or we're not letting students get permanent visas. But then they look at the university system and go, we can't afford it. Uni students vote. We can't let all our universities go bust. Shit, what do we do? And that is the catch-22. And I say to people, if you want to wind back immigration, join me on the team that says let's blow up the universities. Otherwise, I don't know what the option is.
I think we're going to have to crunch the numbers on this, John. I think there's some good insights there. I just want to have a look at what that would mean. I mean, you said an order of magnitude. I know you're exaggerating, but there's no doubt that it would mean significantly more, either federal spending or increase in HEX or HELP or whatever they call it now. So, I wouldn't mind crunching the numbers on that just to see what that looks like, because that should be in the policy debate. That should be in the discussion we're having.
I think it's the core of it. I mean, it's student visas that are pushing the whole migration issue, and it's student visas turning into permanent visas that is turning the total number of foreign citizens issue. So it's at the core of it. And look, if you doubled the size of university fees, some people would stop going. But I mean, you've also got the issue there that if people just go and then study, lesbian dance theory or basket weaving, then they'll just go out, leave the country, not get a job. So they'll not pay that back, which still will leave those universities without enough money, or the government having to pick up the bill. So at some stage, they'll have to incentivize people to start studying things that are only useful. And that fundamentally changes universities. Like a lot of universities there are going to have to shut down a lot of their useless departments that don't create people who add net value to the economy afterwards. I mean, they can continue on as hobbies, but now you're paying $100,000 a year for your hobby. I think a lot fewer people are going to take out that $100,000 a year hobby. They'll just, go and play soccer instead. Probably makes more sense.
Yeah, gee. Good points, John.
But that migration one is, if we go back to the original conversation here on the fertility, It's only one part of the puzzle because it doesn't even fix the problem. Also, firstly, migrants who come in, because this was in the first intergenerational report back in 2001, I believe, when people said, "Oh, don't worry about the aging population. We've got migrants." The issue with that is migrants. This is the first comment I heard on this as the rejoinder was, migrants also get older, which is true.
Exactly.
Also, the migrants, once they come into this country, even if they come from a population that had a high fertility rate, and there's basically nowhere in the world that does anymore except the Congo and Zambia, as soon as they get to Australia, their fertility rate drops anyway. So the only way the migration answer works to solve the drop in fertility rate is if you continually bring in a higher percentage of migrants every year, which is just, it gets ridiculous, right? So you bring in, 1 million over the last 2 years, would have to bring in 1.5 million over the next 2 years, then 2 million over the next 2 years. It starts getting, and that's just raw numbers. You have to increase it as a percentage. So it's not a solution. It's not a solution to that problem. So we're going to have to go back and look for other solutions. The only real solution is to try to get the fertility rate up somehow. But if we don't even know what's causing it, then how do we work? What do you think's causing it, by the way, G? What's your theory?
It's got to do a lot with, the rise of, I think it is the breakdown in the social connections or the social relationships that we once had. I think you're right. I think you're right there. I mean, we've got a rise of singletons, haven't we? Or people who live on their own or don't partner up and don't marry. I mean, I'm one of them, so I'm part of the problem. Okay, we've basically got and that birth gap documentary.
It's not too late, Gene.
I know it's definitely not. Definitely not. So the birth gap documentary highlighted it's not necessarily women who are in couples or marry or have partners who are the issue, because their fertility rate, I don't think, has changed much, has it? It's the fact that there's more and more women who never have children.
Oh, that's worth repeating, because this is something that I think a lot of people miss.
Yeah.
Just to give another history lesson, and I'm sorry, I love this issue. That's the wrong thing to say, because I think it's a deeply scary issue, but I find this issue fascinating. So I've done several deep dives, and you find that the fertility rate dropped off around the world in two different types. There's two different types of a drop off. Firstly, when people went through the Industrial Revolution, and that happened in different areas at different times, average family sizes dropped from like 6 or 7 down to about 2.5 to 3 or something like that. So that happened in different places at different times. And then you've had this second drop off over the last 30, 40, 50 years, depending which country you're in, something around that. This is the modern history drop off in fertility rates, where it's been that's when it trended down to below 2. And the first one that happened in the Western world in the 19th century, that was just caused by people having smaller families, right? Your kids stopped dying in infancy, so you ended up having fewer kids. That's very easy to understand. And then when people saw the second decline, where we went from 2.5 down to 1.5, and in lots of places down to 1.1 or 0.9 or lower, a lot of people just assumed, oh, this must be because people are still having smaller and smaller families. But that's not what happened in the second drop in fertility rates. So this second drop in fertility rates has not been caused by family sizes shrinking. And as you say, the birth gap documentary, if you haven't watched it, just go to YouTube, Google birth gap. It's a fascinating and depressing insights in that. A good documentary. Yeah. As they pointed out, the average family size in a lot of these countries over the last 30, 40 years has stayed the same. If you have kids, the number of kids you have has stayed the same. Used to be, I think in America, used to be 2.5, still 2.5. And what's happened is there's just this massive increase in childlessness. So we've got this childlessness epidemic, and a lot of that's being caused. And if you interview the people, because you say, oh, okay, people don't want kids, that's not what's changing. The actual rate of people who say they want kids has also stayed the same. What's happened is people who want kids, a increasing cohort of those people are putting off finding a partner, and then trying to find a partner, and then they can't, and then they age out, and then they go, oh shit, I've missed it. And that's gone from, it used to be a couple of percent like that everyone felt very sorry for. That cohort now has boomed, right? You now have a massive cohort. You walk around the cities, you can throw a rock and you'll hit 10 people like this, where it's just childless people living a good inner city life. But that type of animal didn't used to exist, at least not in the numbers that we have it today, and that has boomed. And there's also a lot of regret that apparently there's coming from that, which is a very difficult sociological issue that we're going to have to learn to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of what's caused it, I think your observations about the decline of those traditional connections, I think that has to be part of it. The rise of individualism and self-actualizations coming out of the 60s and into the 70s, the 80s. I mean, I think the whole culture's changed. I mean, the whole world's different now, and there's more of a focus on the career and how I can, experience the world, travel and all of that. So, yeah, that's got to be part of it too.
Yeah, the other thing, and this is a very touchy issue for people to discuss on this one, but I mean, if we're just looking at the things that are correlated, it's pretty hard to avoid. There is a pretty stark correlation between the women's workforce participation, which makes sense if you just think about the issue. Is a bunch of people want kids, but they're delaying it. Women now go to university more than men, and university now generally means more than, firstly in Queensland, we start uni a year later than we did when I was a kid. And then 3 years is no longer enough. You have to do your 4-year undergrad plus your 2-year postgrad. So you're coming out in your early to mid 20s. And then if you've done 6 years of uni with your HECS debt, you're not just going to finish that and refuse to get a job. I mean, at the end of your master's, you're looking for your grad job. You have to do your grad job for a couple of years before you can get into the career, real career growth. And so before you know it, you've turned around and you're 30 and you haven't even started. Now, it used to be that most people had their kids before they were 25. And now people haven't even started thinking about kids until they're 30. Now, as the Birth Gap documentary shows, you turn around, you start when you're 30. If you're a woman, if you're a guy, your fertility window is a little bit longer. But if you're a woman, you can there settle down. But if you spend a couple of years finding the right person and then spend a couple of years getting into the right situation, you can make it. But if you have like one relationship that takes up too much time and then doesn't work out, and not everyone finds the person they want to settle down with straight away. So that's and I'm not saying there's an easy solution there, but I mean that seems like it shows up in the data, and it seems to make sense if you just think about the logic of spending 6 years at uni and 6 years in the workforce before you start looking to have a kid. It's going to mean that some people are unintentionally childless, which is exactly what we're seeing. The other one we see is inner cities. Big cities are fertility destroyers. So people who live regionally tend to have bigger blocks, and bigger houses on bigger blocks tend to be correlated with bigger families. And also people who live regionally tend to have closer ties with family, church, and community. So the access to the all important backyard is one part of it. And that atomism as well, just that there's this more atomistic individualism. But I think that kind of comes from some of the other things we've been talking about. But there's a lot in this. As you see, I get very animated when I talk about it and I lose total track of time. But this is not just an Australia specific thing. I guess that's the important thing to take away from it. This is happening everywhere. So people try to look for an answer. When they first see the fertility rate drop in their own country, they think, oh, what's happened in my country lately? Well, you've got to explain what's happened in our country, in Korea, in Chile, in Bulgaria, in Ireland, and in Sri Lanka all at the same time. That makes it a bit harder to work out what's going on.
Yeah, but we had a period where we were going against the rest of the world, and we had increase in fertility in the in the early part of the century, some people will say, well, that was the baby bonus. Do we need to bring something like the baby bonus back to promote fertility? I'm not sure to what extent it did cause it, but certainly we should be looking at what is it that is stopping people from wanting children. Why did we have that period where we were increasing infertility? Have we made our cities too difficult to live in? Have we is life just too costly now? Or do we need to try and promote those social ties? Although we don't really want government trying to do that, do we? What is it about government that is stopping those social ties from forming? Is it the welfare state? I suppose that would be the argument. That's the classic that'll be the classical liberal argument, wouldn't it?
Well, that was my argument at CPAC last year, where I made the case that is the rise of the welfare state has crowded out the traditional role of family, church, and community. And everyone likes to think you join a family because for love, you join a church for faith, you join a community for civic mindedness. And that's probably the thing that's going on in the front of your cortex. But those institutions have been massively successful everywhere in the world, everywhere through history, for a reason. And I don't think it is just that everyone sort of had this same vibe of faith and love in the front of their cortex. It's because they were massively useful economic institutions that helped us coordinate in a very successful way. And if you take away some of those core economic reasons to form and be loyal to your family, church, and community, then people will start feeling like it's a little bit easier to flippantly, I don't really need that. And if I have one, it's a bit annoying, I can throw it away. And on all three of those counts, family, church, and community. And more flippantly throwing that away because instead you have another economic safety blanket. That used to be your economic safety blanket, your family, church, and community. But now instead you can just go get a check from the Centrelink office. Much less social interaction, much less human connection. But there is probably a more generous welfare check involved. And I would argue that creates less incentive to invest in family, church, and community. Yeah, and the correlation there seems unstoppable.
Yeah, and less mutual obligation or obligation to try and look after yourself and pull yourself out of the mess you're in too. I think perhaps the previous way we were doing things was better in that there was that moral pressure on people to actually, look after themselves and, not be a burden on others. So
everyone falls through tough patches from time to time and needs some sort of safety blanket. And that's what people, through this very atomized approach we have to the world now, people recognize that you can fall on hard times and you need a safety blanket. Yes. And they look around and think there is no safety blanket. It must be the government. We've always had one. History has always evolved some sort of system of a fallback mechanism. It has been through nearly all of history, everywhere in the world, family, church, and community, or in some places, family, mosque, and community, or family, synagogue. And you get the idea, right? It's family, church, or equivalent, and community. And once we crowded it out, it got crowded out. And as an economist, I got to say that seems very predictable. So it's I would say the welfare state has something to do with it. But also, that's somewhat a convenient answer for me, I guess, as a libertarian and as an economist. I don't think that's the full answer, though, because I think there's another part of the answer which is much less convenient and I don't know what to do about, and that is the just decrease in transaction costs, right? And especially I'm talking transport and communication. The decrease in transport and when you have high transport and communication costs, it forces you to invest in your local community, in your family. You're stuck physically in one spot, and you are speaking to the people who are also stuck in the same spot with you. And that high transport and communication cost forces that investment in your local family, church, and community. And now when we've got low transaction costs, and I'm not saying we should have high transaction costs. I'm not saying let's chuck up all the barriers and blow up all the trains and destroy the internet. That's not a viable option, and I'm not suggesting that. And that's why this is a trickier part of the puzzle, because if the problem is the welfare state, you can wind back the welfare state. I can see a solution. If the problem is low transaction costs have just made it much more easy to be an atomized cog in the machine. You get a great job offer to go and live in Houston. 2 years later, you get a great job offer to go live in London. 3 years later, you get a great job offer to go live in Beijing. Great. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. You can just, the transaction costs are so low, you can just go hop, hop, hop. Great. Now you're 35 and don't have kids. Right. So it's, I say that with no solution in mind, but I think that's part of the issue. Just the low transaction costs has made it easier to hop between communities instead of investing in the community you've got.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Righto. John, you think we touched any third rails tonight?
I think I did all the getting in trouble, so you're probably safe. But
we shall see.
Yes, I think we'll skip. There was two other topics we were thinking of touching on, but I think we've gone over time anyway. And so that's good to have topics up our sleeve, because we will be back next week. I'm not going to be skipping my Thursdays anymore now that I've got functional Wi-Fi in the room. So if you agree with that, Gene, maybe we'll
yes,
we'll leave the US shutdown and the Argentina bailout or bail in. We'll talk about that next week. For next week, for the next session of Death and Taxes.
That sounds good. Actually, we might have to do it a different night because next Thursday is the CIS Concilium on the Gold Coast.
Oh.
The dinner for that. So I will. I think I'll be at the dinner, but we may be. We may have to do it. Maybe we can do it after the dinner, after I've had a couple of glasses of champagne. And
that'll make it fun. And then we should reopen this conversation because
yes,
we have to see what we have to say with a few drinks.
That sounds good.
Or you could just put your phone on the table at Concilium, and we could.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that'll make me popular. Yes. Oh, we'll see. We'll get some good cameos. Yes.
Anyway, thank you, Gene, for the fascinating chat, and thank you everybody at home and those people in the chat. I've been putting in those comments. I have been, and I still am, John Humphreys, my partner, as always, in this live streaming adventure, Gene Tunny. We do this, I was going to say every Thursday, now he's made a liar out of me. We do this most Thursdays. But look out for us on X, on Facebook, on YouTube. Please go there, give us a like, give us a follow, share this episode. Look for Australian Taxpayers Alliance, and you can also look for Gene and myself. Link to our X accounts is in the write-up to this, wherever you're watching it. So I hope you'll get involved, and I hope you'll be back next week. And until then, thank you for watching, and see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.